All right, we are live with Alex de Miranda, who I'm actually pulling out of the stream because I want to ask you a question. How do you acclimate yourself when you move to a new, get into a new situation or move to a new culture? We are going to learn a lot today from my guest, Alex de Miranda, who is his passion, his spark that drives him is cultural exchange. And Intercultural Spark is just about that. What's that spark inside of you that makes you want to spark change in the world and in your business? So Alex and I met right after he moved from Sao Paulo in 2012. He was volunteering for the Illinois-Sao Paulo Partners of the Americas. And today he is the chapter president. So I'm excited to welcome Alex. Hello, hello, hello. Alex, how are you?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm excited and I'm pretty well. I mean, nothing to complain.
I was saying, besides, then who would want to listen, right? Who has time for complaining? So,
right.
So Alex, I was saying, when I first met you, it was 2012, and you were volunteering to help promote the Mostra Brazilian Film Festival.
Right.
And now it's perfect timing because now, number one, you're president of the Illinois-Sao Paulo chapter of Partners, and Mostra is coming up in just a few weeks. So how did you even find Mostra and the Illinois-Sao Paulo Partners? Because you were brand new to Chicago.
Good question. I think it wasn't even a month that I was here in Chicago that I met Ariane, and there was true connections. A friend of mine who lives here for a few years, and she introduced me to Ariane, who was at the time looking for someone to help her with Mostra, Brazilian Film Festival, within the communications and marketing piece of the festival. And I was right there. I wanted to volunteer. I wanted to spend time and emerge in the culture within the US. And I accepted right out of the bat because that's, and it's difficult to say no to Ariane. You know her. She's just a sweet person. So it's and I love working with her. So it was a good match.
Mm-hmm. And Ariane Friedel. So Ariane founded Mostra, the Mostra Brazilian Film Festival. It's now in its 11th year. But the other thing I found out about you is that you also just always said yes. Like sometimes I'd be like, really? Because you were so nice. And what was interesting, and maybe you can talk about this a little bit, Alex, because at the time, I recall you were really shy about spoken English,
right.
But your written English was beautiful.
Do you think so? That's good. It's still improving. There's always something to learn, right? But the main reason to move to Chicago was to learn English. So the idea was to spend a few months here, study English, and go back to Brazil. But and you're right. I was, shy because I thought that I knew English when I came to Chicago, and I knew nothing. I like to say I was English deaf because people would speak to me and I was like, what are you saying? And but for me, writing was always easy. I like writing. So I don't know if for people it's the same way, the way they learn, but for me, writing, it's definitely the most easiest part. But yeah, so I said yes because I wanted to be part of something. I wanted to be around people that not only were doing great things, but also they were speaking English, by my side, and I could learn from them. And that was a great way to learn for sure. Besides going to school, just, spending time with people and, just listening all the time, what they had to say about Mostra, about partners, about what's happening in Chicago. I think that was one of the most right decisions to make when I first arrived here in Chicago.
So what's interesting in terms of connecting with the Illinois-Sao Paulo Partners chapter, I will share that so my husband, Eugenio, who is Brazilian, when we moved from Boston to Illinois, we wanted to find the Brazilians. We wanted to find the Brazilian community. So what's so funny is I called the Chicago Public Library and literally said, where are all the Brazilians? And they gave me Asir da Silva's phone number. And Asir at the time, he was head of community relations for ComEd, but he was then president of Illinois-Sao Paulo Partners. And so that organization was an anchor for us to the Brazilian community. And now you're president. So talk a little bit more. I have to be careful because I know so much about partners, but my viewers don't necessarily know. So tell me a little bit more about Partners in the Americas and what it does in the chapter.
Right. So Partners of the Americas is an organization idealized by John F. Kennedy back in the 60s. And the idea was to create this people-to-people diplomacy for people here in the US, get to know people in Latin America, by engaging with them people to people. It's not like organizations going there and trying to do things. It's not like corporations going there and doing projects. It's more like sending people to get to know other people, like on the fields. And from there, there's, which is interesting about Partners, there's so many people in the board right now that, it started engaged with the organization about like 30, 40 years ago, and they're still in the organization because that what connects them with Brazil. And interestingly, I didn't meant to connect with Brazil right away because I wanted to learn English, like I said. But I'm so glad I did, because I'm knowing more about Brazil now that I'm outside of Brazil than when I was there. I have to study more about Brazil and learn more what's happening right there, out there, to be able to be the ambassador of the culture of Brazil. And one way that Partners do that.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And so Partners, our chapter, Illinois, it's the partner of the Sao Paulo chapter, which is very convenient to me because I'm from Sao Paulo. So it was like, the stars are aligning here. So there's something about this organization that is for me. That's, I have to engage with them. And so I started with Mostra volunteering. One thing that I didn't mention, we are a non-profit organization. We are all volunteers. So all the projects, we are a project-based organization. And Mostra, like you're seeing right now, is in the 11th year, all non-profit. So we screen movies free of charge, with the idea of bringing social conscience to people through the movies. But Mostra is not only the only project. We had the Partners Talk series where we bring experts about Brazil to talk about, what's happening right there. We had Larry Roeder, he's a writer in the New York Times. We had Professor Ben Penglase from Loyola University speaking about his doctoral thesis that he did in the favelas of Rio de Janeiro. We had Frances Pontes Peebles talking about her novels. She's Brazilian American who writes in English about Brazilian theme stories. So that's a very interesting connection with Brazil.
Oh, what's her name again? That sounds so interesting.
Frances Pontes Peebles.
Okay.
Yeah, I can send you the link later. So we try to connect the community here that are interested in Brazil or Latin America, and bring that culture and arts. And that could also be talks about agriculture. We had board members, there were architectures as well. So Partners is very dynamic. It depends who are in the board, who is in the board, and then those people in the board, they bring their expertise, and we bring projects based on affinities and what's connecting with them.
Sure. So I have two questions. We're going to circle back to Mostra because I want to see how it's going to work virtually. But something you said is so interesting, where you talked about that you learned more about Brazil once you were in the US because you felt like you had to be an ambassador. Talk more about what that was like.
Yeah, one of the greatest surprise that I had when I arrived here, people love Brazil. For some reason, we had this, great connection with, not only Americans, but also people from outside. If I met like an European, I tell that I'm Brazilian, they immediately connect and try to understand more about the culture. They know a little bit, about samba, about soccer, about caipirinha, whatever it is, but they want to learn more, and they are welcome. They are open to learn more. And because of that, people asking questions about the country, people, just wanting to learn more, I felt the responsibility to, to deliver that content, that that information with more with more sustained information. And Mostra helps a lot doing that, because we bring movies that the idea of Ariane Friedel, the founder and director of Mostra, was to bring those movies that can shy away from the stereotypes of Brazil. Like, we're not only carnival, we're not only samba, we're not barbecue and caipirinhas, but we are also a rich country with rich culture. There's a lot about arts, there's a lot about music, and we talk about politics as well. We talk about the environment, we talk about the Amazon, we talk about a bunch of things through the movies. And it's a great way to kind of teach people about who we are, other than the things they already know. As for, we love being, the happy country of, carnival and samba, but we're more than that.
Yeah. So if anyone's watching live, I invite you to send us questions in the comments. I would say still, Alex, one of my all-time favorite movies is called Sanitation, the movie. And that's one. It's with Wagner Moura. Before he was like the Narcos tough guy, he was hilarious and so Brazilian. So like just that kind of it's almost like joie de vivre, like he loves life, but just kind of funny Brazilian. That movie, it also showcased the Brazilian sense of humor, because it was a company a city that needed a sanitation system, but the city government only had money for video production. So they made a video. They made like a horror film and were able to actually build the sanitation system. Through that. It's so funny. It's called Sanitation, the movie, with Wagner Moura. But that was one of the Mostra films a number of years ago.
Right. Yeah, there's so many movies. This year, it's so diverse, the range of movies that we are showing right now. And just encourage everyone that is watching to go to our website, mostrafilmfestival.org, and check the lineup, because it's really rich. The creation committee, we have a committee to select the movies, and they worked really hard the entire year just to be able to bring a specific selection to the audience.
And how will it work? So the films have always been free because of relationships with the universities. The films have always been free. How is it going to work now that it's all virtual? Are the films at specific times, or how do you access and watch the movies, assuming they're still all free?
Yeah, there will be free. I think we will encourage suggested donation.
Okay, sure.
But we're using a platform this year that we are revealing in a couple of days which one is it, and we're gonna leave the movies, some of them for a few days, some of them for the entire duration of Mostra, which is from the November 4th to the 14th.
Okay.
So people are going to be able to choose, when they want to watch. If they're, for instance, the opening night movie, which is Resistance or Legalidade in Portuguese, it's going to be live for a few days only. So if they want to watch that movie and discuss with the filmmaker,
when's that? That was always such an important part of the Mostra, is that you were able to have conversations with sometimes the actors or the filmmakers.
Right. Yeah, we are. Yeah, so that was the main premise of Mostra, not only bringing those movies with social conscience, but also fostering that conversation between students, professors, and filmmakers,
Mhm.
so they can debate and talk about the social issues that we were discussing in the movie.
Mhm.
This year, we're going to do the same, but virtually through Zoom calls.
Okay.
And so we're going to have specific dates for the directors to engage with the audience. So that's why sometimes we're going to encourage people to watch first so they can fully engage with the director by certain dates.
Oh, that's great. So people can, I'm sure you'll be tweeting and posting about it on
Oh, yeah,
Instagram, or people can go to the website as well. So
yeah, we have a few directors that are already confirmed, so stay tuned for their bios.
oh, that's great. That's great. So, Alex, you have said that cultural exchange and intercultural communications is really something that's so important to bring the world together. And you do that obviously both with partners, but also in your work at Drumm, which is
Right.
a intercultural communications agency. What are some of the challenges that your clients have that they would come to you for?
Great question. Yeah, I think clients, they want to understand now how to communicate in an authentic way with diverse audiences, and this has been, a growing, ask for us for the past, well, since I started at Drumm. Drumm is a practice under NOC, the main agency, the parent agency, and we created Drumm for that reason, because clients were asking us, how can we fully engage with diverse populations, meaning and thinking that the diverse population in the US is just growing. It's not going to go anywhere. So today we are 18% is Hispanics / Latinx, and 13% Black Americans, and almost 10% Asian Americans, and growing, one of the fastest growing populations in the country. So we're not going anywhere. And by 2050, we're going to be diverse population. It's going to be the majority minority. So the corporations are seeing that, and they are looking for partners that want to, that can help them to fully engage. So I think the challenges that we face in our work is really, fully understand those populations, and, dive deep into research and to really find that commonality, what's the human insight that we can understand from those populations that we can fully integrate in our campaigns, and make it more inclusive and more representative of, the real life that's out there. I think that's the key challenge that we are facing right now.
Mm-hmm. And then how do you work with culture experts? So do you have people, I guess, is the team that's working on the marketing campaigns also diverse to be able to speak in first person about different cultures?
Right. Yeah. I'm considered a specialist of the agency, and then whenever we have to fully engage in different ways, we work with partners to bring that perspective, authentic perspective, so we can hear from their voices. What's their opinion? What do they know, and how they can contribute. But really starting with forming the team that is going to work on the projects, it's essential, bringing that, diverse perspective from the beginning, from the get-go. I think that what makes the work unique.
I noticed also, which I found interesting. So you were a copywriter in Brazil before you came to the US. I'm just wondering how messaging might be different. Like what types of campaigns might appeal to Brazilians as opposed to how Americans, like what they tend to like to see in advertising.
Yeah, I think I will never stop writing, even as a strategist. I think you write a lot as a strategist, but I think the difference between the strategy and copywriting, just to provide a background, is more like the copywriting, it's the end product, and the strategy is more like one step back of that, fully develop what the consumer facing advertising. But in terms of the difference, what's the difference between Brazil and the US? There's so many. I think to name one, I see the campaigns here in the US. There's that, feeling of competition. You see that, when you see a a car commercial, for instance. It's more like competing. I have the best car than you. Like there's that type of engagement that people here in the US are attracted to for some reason. In Brazil, I think it's more, I don't know, we like party. It's more like the party thing. It's try to get the most positive out of the campaigns, like what's resonating with the consumer in a positive way. Not that being competitive is not positive, but it's more like it's more like fun. It's more on the fun side than the the drama. I don't know.
One thing I've noticed, it's so interesting about Brazil. So my first exposure to Brazil was actually, I studied comparative literature in college, and my professor did a whole section on concrete poetry and modern messaging. And I don't know if people realize, like, Brazil was way at the forefront. Like, they had movie billboards on sides of buildings well before we had that in the US. And so very modern, and just a really modern and fine aesthetic in the advertising. So,
yes, Brazil is it's a leading force in advertising worldwide. I mean, if you see the award shows out there, Brazil, it's the top lead together with the US and probably UK. But I think sometimes the lack of resources brings us, the opportunity to be more scrappy and creative. So I think that helps too. But you're right. I think that this aesthetic and the arts that Brazilian brings, I think maybe it's from generations ago, and it's just tapping to advertising right now. But yeah, I think. But I had this concept, this theory in my mind that we have to be creative in Brazil to be able to deliver things the client needs, because the budget is limited. So we have to be very, very scrappy and go behind the scenes to make things, and go work past hours and late hours to do things. And I don't know, we do that here in the US too. Americans are workaholics for sure, but in the advertising industry in Brazil, that happens a lot.
I know one big difference. The first time I went to Brazil, this is a long time ago, but there were billboards on the side of buildings. So literally, like a 20-story woman wearing like the littlest bra and underwear you could ever see. Now, in all fairness, then you would see a bare-chested man. Like those actually did get banned, because I would imagine people were driving and having car accidents. But it felt surprising to me at the time because of just the exposure. But one thing I learned culturally, say that again.
The exposure of the body, you mean?
Exposure of the body in such a public way. And maybe now people listening now would be like, really? Like, that's everywhere. But this was the late 80s, early 90s. In the US, like, you weren't doing there wasn't that kind of exposure in such a public way. But here's one thing I learned. So when I first saw it, my husband and I had an argument about that women were being exploited, because there was all these bare, naked women everywhere. It was being exploited. The more I learned about the culture, though, nobody was being exploited. Like, Brazilians, which I love, as opposed to the US, really just love their bodies. It's more like a matter of fact, like, this is who I am and take it or leave it, as opposed to the US, where there's so much judgment about that. Have you noticed that as well? I found that to be really liberating and wonderful.
Yeah, I think we have such an European, influence. If you compare to France, it's very similar. Like they are risky. They're not afraid of exposed sexuality. But I have the feeling that's changing a little bit, and the women are maybe feeling that that's a little bit of exploitation. Not back then, not 20 years ago, not even 10 years ago, but just paying attention to the campaigns that is happening right now in Brazil. And there was even one campaign from a beer company, and beer brands, they love to just bring beautiful women and with
Sure.
bikinis and talk about beer. But there was this there was this campaign, I think was a few years ago, from Skol. It's a brand in Brazil, a beer brand. They invited women artists to reimagine their campaigns from years ago. They were
that sounds fascinating.
They were exploiting women's body to sell beer, and they thought and said, "Oh, wait a minute! We think that was wrong, so let's recreate that." So they recreated the same ads from the vision of women. So they were illustrations. They just illustrating clothing or anything that could help to elevate and empower women other than their bodies. So I think that's changing a little bit, and that's, I think, worldwide. I think it's having that conversation about women empowerment and not using women's image and appearance just to sell products, but also make sure they are feeling empowered. And
well, I think we're coming to it from two sides, both from the making sure that there's not exploitation, but also is the body positive movement. Is that something that's happening in Brazil as well?
Oh yeah, I mean, in some places more than others. I mean, if you go to Rio de Janeiro or Ipanema, you're going to see, many beautiful people, women and men, because they have this culture about their bodies. They like exercising, and it's a beach city, right? Like, so it's they are there to show up their bodies. So I think there's this too. I think they love cultivating a healthy, good looking body. So that's a good point. Yeah.
So talk about, I know you've experienced this, the whole issue between Hispanic and Latino, because I know you've talked about Latinx as a phrase. Of course, Brazilians are not Hispanic, although a lot of people don't know that. Yeah. So how do you, because actually, and I'll just say this, I'm blushing as I say it, but it needs to be said out loud, because they speak Portuguese in Brazil, just in case, so we're all on the same page. How does that play out in your marketing work as far as language?
I think that's I just put a poll on LinkedIn just to understand what people would like to, what term they prefer to use. Either I actually asked, do you prefer to use Latinx or Latina and Latino? And it's
Latinx is the gender neutral version of Latino or Latina.
Correct. That's correct. And I prefer to use Latinx because it's just a way to acknowledge, people that are not conforming with either gender. And it's a more inclusive way to use language. And that's a choice, but that's a choice that I can make. And then if that would help people, why not to make those choices, right? So I make those choices when I'm working, when I'm writing projects. That's the way I prefer to say. And just to note, I'm not Hispanic, I'm Latino, I'm not Latinx. And I was just reading about this the other day, and there's a great video on BBC News that explained very well what's the difference between Hispanics and Latinos, Latinx. And it's just great. I think there's more people need to know the nuances, so they can talk properly about those terms and they can use properly as well. But yeah, I think because we work with communications, we have this power to use this terms and language and that is evolving. I mean, language is dynamic; it's ever evolving. So why not include that term?
I think sometimes it's marketing that's actually creating the terms. I mean, it's the need in society because there is so much about the fluidity of gender and pronouns, the emphasis of pronouns, which is more pronounced in other countries where every word has a feminine or masculine ending to it, just in the nature of the word.
Yeah, we were just having a discussion the other day at the agency about the term BIPOC. and I went to Google Trends to see when does that happen to peak, like when people started to really search about BIPOC. And that was really the beginning of June this year, after the murder of George Floyd, and people were just, starting to talk about BIPOC. And
BIPOC is Black, Indigenous, people of color?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, it's a big term. I mean, it's easier to say BIPOC than to name,
Sure,
everybody. But I don't have an opinion on. I'm still learning and studying what's the best way to do it, and I wanted to hear from people from that community. I'm part of that community, to be honest. So I don't like using that term, but I want to hear more. Is that, and I don't know if that came from academia or that came from marketing or not. But I'm still learning. So, but that's a conversation that fascinates me.
Well, and what do you think you're saying? I'm sorry, but the idea of you saying you don't feel like the term applies, and yet you self-identify as part of that community. So what is it that's a disconnect for you on that?
I don't know.
Or is it just
what was that?
Or is it just it's sometimes just that whole concept of being labeled? People resist a little bit.
Yes, I think that's the concept of being labeled, and also it's an effort to put everybody in one bucket. When and that's what we try to do with Drumm. It's not to put everybody in a bucket. It's look at the individual, and see what it's the meaningful thing that individual can bring to the campaign that we are creating. And putting people in one label, in one bucket as BIPOC, it doesn't feel right to me. So I struggle a little bit. I use the term sometimes, but I'm still navigating if that's the right term and to make the right decisions if that's the best term to use or not. But I think you're right. It's the sentiment of being labeled,
Well, I think in any time you're using some sort of racial or cultural identifier, there's always the need to at least ask the question: is there a need to label? Is there a need to use a label in this point, or does that not make a difference?
Right.
Right.
I
mean, that whole thing of identification is really interesting because as someone who's white, for the longest time, I was just me, which is not right, but I do a lot of work in diversity and inclusion. So now it's realizing that, well, I'm white, I'm Jewish, I'm a woman, like realizing that there are those different labels, not that things need to be labeled, but as a white person, where we were majority culture, it was easier to say, well, I don't have to identify who I am. Yet at the same time, people were coming up with terms for other people. So,
right. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I mean, who came up with the term? What? I don't know who, but what someone from the community that decided, oh, that's the best way to do it, so we don't exclude anybody, right? But I like what you're saying. How do we identify ourselves, right? So Alex is Brazilian, Latinx, Latino. You can call me both. I don't mind. Brazilians don't identify as Latinos. I do. So
Brazilians don't. Okay, tell me more about that.
Yeah, I cannot speak to everybody, right? So we are 220 million people in Brazil, but
tell us, how do all those Brazilians think, Alex?
But if you would ask people, most of them would not identify as, of course, not as Hispanic, but neither as Latino, and but I do because I feel connected with the culture. I'm from Latin America. I understand that I'm part of that. I'm a member of that community, but they identify as Brazilians,
Or, I've talked to, I think, Marcelo Jarmendia. He was on the show a couple weeks ago, and we've joked, and my husband as well, when they were in Brazil, they identified as white, and so that's the thing that's so silly, where you realize that race and all that is such a social construct. So just because of moving from Brazil to the US, well, all of a sudden, you go from being white to now people are calling you Latino or trying to come up with a term for it. It goes back to what you said before about having to learn more about Brazil now that you're in the US because of people asking. And I know in our family, so we're intercultural, we're interfaith. So I'm Jewish. My husband is not. We agreed ahead of time to raise our son Jewish. And I even wrote an article for Interfaith Family that was how to act Jewish enough to raise a Jewish son. You know? All of a sudden, I just set an example. I'm like getting my books, calling the rabbi, you know?
Right. Were you not acting Jewish that much before?
Well, actually, I need a better poker face. It wasn't, I was good, like with a lot of people with religion, where it's like, you ask me any question about the holidays and things like that. But you know, the day-to-day things were really important, or why we had certain traditions. Those were the deeper answers I needed, and things to practice at, if we wanted to practice at home. You know, Judaism was more something I would do like when I was in the synagogue. But now if you want to be a Jewish home, it's actually, I just learned, I've been baking challah lately. So I've learned to bake challah.
Oh, nice.
I'm totally, that was not even a full sentence, but the point was you had to do more to set the example that people could copy, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's that idea of you're mentioning before, you know, you identify as a woman, as white, as Jewish. So that idea of the intersectionality, right? So how many identities do we have, and how, you know, there's so many that intersect, and Alex is multiracial, and probably 4 races within me, with my DNA. Well, many more actually, because I did my ancestry DNA once.
Oh, you did?
Like 14 different countries, so it's crazy. But including, you know, indigenous people, including Africa, including Europe, even Jewish. There's a percentage of you know, European Jewish there. What I don't know where it came from.
There's a lot of Jews. We're actually positive that Gino was originally Jewish. Just little customs that his family had that were like, because during the Inquisition, a lot of Jews escaped and came to Brazil. His mom's maiden name was Pereira, which means pear tree. That was the largest Jewish family in Portugal before the Inquisition. So we're a little suspect. Yeah,
super interesting. I actually was doing some digging, and my last name in Miranda, both I have 2 last names, Miranda and Silva. Silva is from my dad, Miranda from my mom.
Okay.
And both last names were from Jewish, you know, family from the 1600s. And
okay, sure.
So that makes sense. So maybe the little percentage that I have makes sense. Now makes sense. Now it's sinking.
So, well, and then there's all the identities. So there's the physical identities we have. But if you ask me the top 3 things, I also very strongly identify as a mom, as a professional woman. So there's all, not just our physical characteristics, but the roles that we play in relation to others that can be really strong identifiers for us that other people don't always see when they look at us first.
That's a great way to look at it. I've never thought about it, but I'm also a brother. I'm a son, right, to my father. I mean, I'm a professional. I'm an immigrant. So there's so many layers that you can tap into it, and you know, and you can speak about yourself and ourselves in so different, you know, ways, and you just have to pick one and start that conversation.
Well, so speaking of picking one, I know there's so many things, but again, when we talk about intercultural spark, it's that idea of each of us has that spark in us that really drives everything that we do. What would you say is that spark that kind of permeates your life's trajectory?
I think I'm persistent. You know, I think that helps guide me, you know, to whatever I want to do. I was just explaining to my friends the other day that I was a copywriter in Brazil. So I love writing. I do journals, and I try different things with writing besides working with writing. I write a lot to my work, but I didn't think that I was a good writer, you know. before becoming a copywriter in Brazil. And then I went to school. I went to advertising school, of course, and I picked, the writing path because I wanted to be challenged. I liked writing, but I didn't think I was good at it. So I was persistent to go there and learn and try and error and, do that. So I think that's one spark thing that it's within me.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate and love just the in-depth and kind of like we talked about the intersectionality when we talk about culture. So thank you so much. And here's where people can find you on Instagram and Twitter. And I hope hopefully I'll see you soon. I'll be at Mostra. Actually, I'll put the links to make sure everyone can find the Mostra films afterwards, because it's really wonderful films and it'll be a great Brazilian film festival. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Gianna. Thank you for having me today. And please go to mostrafilmfestival.org.
There you go. Yes.
Right.
Thanks. Bye-bye.